Keir Starmer, welcome to Acting Prime Minister.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for having us on the campaign trail with you today. We're just currently on the train now from Bolton to Blackburn.
Just leaving Clitheroe, yeah.
Yeah, where you've got some campaign events this afternoon, I think, going out and meeting some people. And you've been missing from the campaign for a couple of days over the weekend because, quite tragically, your mother-in-law is very ill. And I suppose we should start by just asking how is she and what happened?
Well, look, thanks for asking. She had a very bad accident and she's still in intensive care. So it's very, very difficult for my wife and her family, but thanks for asking.
Well, there are still 2 months left of the campaign, and you're back out now, you're back on the campaign trail, and you're hoping, of course, to get through to the next phase of this campaign. But let's just assume for a moment that you have become Labour leader and that you've become Prime Minister.
Fast forwarding here.
Let's fast forward it a bit, let's put you through that Downing Street door, let's get you in there.
Of course, this doesn't look so good if it all goes horribly wrong.
Look, you've got a dream, okay? You're on this campaign, you've got to come up with what you would want to do as Prime Minister, so this all seems
we've gone
fitting.
right ahead, we've gone way beyond.
We're straight into Downing Street now.
We're straight in.
So we always ask people a couple of fun questions just to begin the podcast. Firstly, what do you think is the picture that you'd hang on the wall in Downing Street?
The picture well, look, I'd take a few of the pictures that are on the wall down, for starters, and make some space. I don't know, I'd probably end up putting some Arsenal pictures up or something like that. Not politicians, I can't stand. When I was a lawyer, everybody used to have portraits of sort of grim-looking judges peering down, and now we have grim-looking politicians. I wouldn't have any of that. I'd have it completely different.
Yeah, there are quite a lot of those in Westminster, aren't there? What's the first drink you'd pour yourself as you're settling into the study?
I'm about to say a stiff whiskey, but it might have to be a stiff coffee if I've actually got to run the country.
Yeah. And who's the first person you'd call?
Well, I think I'd probably have to call my wife and tell her where I was. Although,
she might have seen it on the news.
Well, persuading her out of Kentish Town will be quite a job. So.
All right, let's talk a bit about your path to power now as well, your background and your family. And actually, this has been something that's sort of dominated the campaign. There's been lots of discussion, isn't there, about background and family. You are named after
Keir Hardie,
founder of the Labour Party.
Absolutely.
So do you think being leader is in your destiny? You know, you've been given that name?
If it is, I obviously had no choice over the name. I can't claim any credit for that. I think that reflects the fact that my family were a very strong Labour family. And having Keir's name when I was growing up, because it was unusual, was something I didn't particularly like. Now, of course, I really like it, because when you're growing up, you just want to be called the same as everybody else. I think it reflects the values of my mum and dad.
Did it ever feel like a bit of pressure that maybe that was the direction they expected you to take in politics?
No. They never pushed me in this direction. I was very interested in politics at school, and I think it was my parents that said, you might want to do a law degree rather than politics. So if anything, they were trying to push me in a slightly different direction.
And your dad, I think it's right to say, was a toolmaker?
He was a toolmaker, yeah.
And your mum was a nurse?
Yes, she was.
What do you think is the hardest thing your family went through? Because you did have some tough times as a family, didn't you?
Yes. My dad had to work very hard because he was in manufacturing, and most of his time in manufacturing, heart was being taken out of manufacturing. And therefore it was tough, and his routine was working 8 until 5, coming home for his tea and then going back to work 6 till 10, and that was 5 days a week. That's what he did. But actually we didn't particularly focus on that or grumble about that as a family. More difficult, I suppose, was the fact that my mum was very, very ill all of her life. She had a rare disease called Still's disease, which is where your immune system attacks itself. It's like very aggravated and aggressive arthritis, but she got it when she was 11, and she had to fight that all her life. Was told she couldn't have children, wouldn't be able to walk, and it was a constant battle. And we were in and out of high dependency units a lot, and so I distinctly remember as a school child spending nights in the high dependency unit, worried about what would happen.
How do you think that affected your politics?
I think it made me very determined. My mum was very, very determined. From the moment she was told, you're not going to walk again, she decided she was going to walk again, and was and she did. Every time she was put down, she got back up and did it. So she was very, very determined. and an incredible believer in and advocate of the NHS. Not only because she worked in the NHS when she was able to work, but then it was her lifeline for decades in the end.
And towards the end of her life, it was very debilitating, wasn't it? I mean, the disease was cruel and very, very difficult.
In the end, it was very, very difficult. She was on steroids for a very long time, and that it also took an effect. So for the last 10 years or so of her life, she couldn't walk, she couldn't talk, eat, or really move. And one of the great sadnesses for my wife and I is our children were never able to speak to my mum because when they were born, she was already unable to really speak or respond to them.
Then after childhood, you went on to become a lawyer, as you've already mentioned, and Director of Public Prosecutions. Was Prime Minister ever in your plan?
No. Mind you, Director of Public Prosecution was never in my plan. I became fascinated with law and human rights law. So I was sort of politically active when I was a teenager. But then when I got to study law, I became very, very interested in human rights law and this idea that at the end of the Second World War, with all the horrors that had happened with Nazi Germany and the Second World War, that nations across the world had come together and said, we can never let this happen again. And the only way to make sure it never happens again is to have universal human rights standards that we all sign up to and which we can enforce against each other. And I thought this was an incredible moment. It was an incredible moment. And so my sort of career went down the path of human rights law, which meant I was doing cases in this country on human rights, but then gradually more and more cases abroad. So challenging the death penalty in the Caribbean and in Africa, and doing international human rights cases across the world. So it was a fascinating journey. But if you'd asked me whether this was a plan, then it wasn't, because to take the death penalty, I'd obviously studied enough at university to work out that we got rid of the death penalty in this country. What I hadn't appreciated was that if you're on death row in Jamaica and Trinidad, you still have a right of appeal to the Privy Council, which sits in London. And I found myself defending people and trying to get them off death row. And once I realised how death penalty worked in those countries, I became part of a team that wanted to work out there with other lawyers to try and reduce the use of the death penalty.
Just say we're going through a tunnel at the moment.
Yeah,
which is what
I'm wondering whether any of this is being heard.
It will be, don't you worry. These microphones about
silly answers of your choice.
And having had this background in law, some people say that you're quite controlled as a politician, that you're quite lawyerish, I suppose, as a politician.
Yeah, people find it odd that I quite like to know what the evidence is that actually supports an argument or not. You know, they find this a very odd thing. I find it completely natural. If you're going to argue that something's right or wrong, I just instinctively want to know, well, what's the evidence behind it? Because, you know, as a lawyer, you're in a sort of rules-based system. You have to make rational arguments. And some people feel that they're uncomfortable with that. Actually, in the end, partly it's being a lawyer, partly it's just me. I do think, in the end, you do need to know the evidence and the reasons, the rationale that you're doing things.
I suppose in this contest, everyone's trying to come up with criticisms of the candidates. They're trying to get a picture of what the candidates look like and what they might act like as leader of the Labour Party and as Prime Minister, potentially. And I suppose the criticism is that because you've got that legal background, you're very good on the detail, but maybe you're not so good at kind of inspiring and leading. And do you take that criticism?
Well, one of the things I've learned as a politician is that everybody's got a view on you. I know two people have got the same view. I think we've got members' events tonight. They tend to be very passionate and a lot of toing and froing. So I think it's a mixture. But in the end, I think if you're taking on the government at the dispatch box, it is quite powerful to be able to knock down their case. So I think it's got to be a mixture.
Because people do say you're quite controlled as a politician, what do you do to let yourself go? I mean, what do you do when you're feeling a bit reckless?
Well, firstly, we've got two young kids, and they keep me occupied, and they have no regard for what I do for a living. So when I get home, my little girl, who's 9, usually says to me, "What have you been doing today, Daddy?" I say, "Been in Parliament." She says, "More blah, blah, blah." And so they keep me grounded, and I play football, watch football, and spend a lot of time with friends.
I'm almost too embarrassed to ask this question, but it's on my list, and other people want it to be on my list. People also say you're quite handsome.
I'm not sure what I'd say in response to this.
How would you rate your own looks?
I don't think it's for me to rate. Other people would say that. Again, go on any form of social media and you'll get any number of comments, and most of them are pretty disparaging. So I don't think any of us get above ourselves.
Okay, that keeps you grounded. Right, we've got to get off the train soon, so let's leave that segment of the interview there. So we're here at a food bank now in Accrington, where you've come to visit some people on your campaign tour. There are 2 authentic voices from the Northwest in this campaign. How can you compete with them to really understand the kind of communities that Labour lost when you're not from a region like this?
I don't really think that it's where you're from, it's what you've got to say. And I spent the day here seeing what I've seen in many other towns. Here we are. This is a centre, a fantastic centre, providing support for people with mental health issues, homelessness issues, food bank, all of which used to be provided by others, by local authorities, by the state, and it's not being provided now. The National Health Service can't cope, they're referring people here. And this is the sharp end of 10 years of cuts, and so you see it here, but you see it across the whole country. So it's coming, having those conversations, and people want to know from me, what have you got to say about it, not where you're from.
Where you're from has come up quite a lot, though, in this campaign, and also your gender. I mean, Ian Lavery, the chair of the Labour Party, says you should stand aside, let a woman win. What do you say to that?
Well, look, I don't think any other candidates are standing because they're a man or because they're a woman. Each of us is making the case for what we genuinely think is right for our party, for our movement, and for the country. And I respect that, and I think we're being very constructive and positive about it, and the members will then decide. But we also have to bear in mind that, you know, we need to win back seats in the Midlands, the North West and the North East. Of course we do. There's been a lot of focus on that, and rightly so. But we've also got to win in Scotland. I was in Scotland yesterday. We've got to win in Wales, and we need to win in the South West and the South East. So the leader of the opposition's got to be able to speak for the whole of England, the whole of Wales, the whole of Scotland and Northern Ireland.
Weren't you completely off message in the election? You helped design Labour's Brexit policy. Do you apologise to those MPs who lost their seats on the back of your own policy?
Well, the policy was designed and rolled out by the Shadow Cabinet and by our conference as a whole. Of course, I played my part in that. And
a very big part, Shadow Brexit Secretary. I mean, you were instrumental in it.
Of course. But it wasn't the only thing that came up on the doorsteps by a long shot.
But Brexit dominated the election. I mean, do you take responsibility for that policy?
We all take responsibility. It was a devastating result. But I went, I think, to 44 constituencies. And what came up on the doors was a number of things, but each of the teams had a good conversation about what came up. There was the leadership of the Labour Party, rightly or wrongly. There was Brexit, and a strong feeling that we had knocked down that phrase, get Brexit done. There was a feeling generally that the manifesto, though it had good stuff in it, was overloaded. And then anti-Semitism came up. There were other things as well, but it is a big mistake for our party to suggest that it was just one thing, that if it hadn't been for that, this would have been a very, very successful election. And bear in mind, we've lost 4 elections in a row. And if we lose the next one, the Labour Party will have been out of power for longer than any period since the Second World War. So I'm very concerned that as a party we don't try and identify one thing, it was this, just this, change that, and it'll all be better, because if we do that, we'll end up losing the next general election.
It does beg the question, though, how you can take the party forwards when you designed a policy that took the party backwards.
Well, the policy was thrashed out by Labour, and I stood there at the dispatch box arguing for amendment after amendment to try to get a deal over the line. And we lost every single amendment. And that's because we'd lost the previous election. And what we need to focus on is how do we get the Labour Party to a position where it can win the next general election? Because in opposition, we're not changing anything. We're not doing anything. Now, Brexit is going to be over in the sense we're leaving the EU this Friday. So the Leave Remain argument is over. But what we have to address is how does the Labour Party grasp the scale of the challenge and answer the question, what do the 2020s and 2030s look like? And that's what I'm focused on.
Let's talk about your socialist credentials now.
Yeah.
Some people say you're a wolf in sheep's clothing because you claim to be a socialist, but how can Labour members trust you not to move the party towards the centre?
I don't claim to be anything. All I've done is set out what I've done with my life, the issues I've been concerned with, the cases I've taken on, the campaigns I've been involved with. And they show that I've been championing trade union rights for many, many years, worked with trade unions in hundreds of cases, that I've fought human rights issues across the world, and I've taken a stand on things like the Iraq War, saying at the time it was wrong, writing things about it being wrong at the time, and taking on the Blair government. So I'm not claiming anything. What I have done is setting out what I've actually done with my life, and people will judge that.
What you've also done was resign from Jeremy Corbyn's shadow team in 2016. What does that say about your socialist credentials?
I resigned. I thought at the time that we needed a change. We then had a leadership election. Jeremy Corbyn won it. He invited me to be in the shadow cabinet. I took up the invitation, and I have loyally and faithfully given him the best I can in the shadow cabinet. And I don't think many people would say that in the last 2.5 years, 3 years, that I haven't done my level best to give the Labour Party the best chance going forward.
Can you guarantee that under your leadership, the party would not move any further towards the centre? Because that's what people on the left want to know. Can they trust you?
Yes, they can. And I've said very loudly and very clearly that whilst, of course, we shouldn't trash the last Labour government, we shouldn't trash the last 5 years either.
But where does that put you? Where does that put you on the spectrum?
Let me just finish the point. Because what Jeremy Corbyn brought to the Labour Party was a proper sense of the Labour Party being anti-austerity, being the party that stood up against cuts, and you can see here what happens if you don't stand up against cuts, to be the party of common ownership and the party that invests in public services and invests in our economy and the Green New Deal. All of that is good, and there's a tendency in parties and organisations when you lose something to say, well, we must have got it completely wrong. And I say we shouldn't do that. We should keep those fundamental shifts to a more radical position. They were right. But we've got to take on the next stage of the journey. And the next stage of the journey is, what is it in the 2020s, probably 2024 next election, that is the radical programme for real change in the late 2020s and 2030s. And that's the bit of work we've got to do. And people cast around for names in history to help them on this journey. Actually, we've got to do this bit. We've got to do it as a party and a movement. We've got to do it for our country.
But Labour members want certainty about where you are on that spectrum. Can you provide any certainty? Are you saying you would not move the party any further towards the centre?
I think the radical changes we've made since 2015 have been right. And that would be the foundational block. I think the 2017 manifesto was a manifesto uniformly welcomed by our members and our supporters, and actually something talked about on the doorsteps. I think we squandered the opportunity to take that forward. So that would be, if you like, a foundational stone for me. But we have to recognise that we are now dealing with the late 2020s and 2030s, and we need to concentrate on what the next manifesto says about that radical challenge. But I don't shy away from it. If you look at the depth of the inequality that we've got in our society across our country now, whether it's income, wealth, health, mental health services, food banks everywhere, you're not going to deal with that without fundamental change. So I'm up for fundamental change. I want it to be radical, but it's got to be relevant, and people have got to look at the Labour Party and say, we trust you to carry that out.
So the Labour Party stays right where it is on the left of politics, no shift?
The fundamentals are radical. Of course, they have to be radical.
But can't you just give that guarantee that you won't move the party towards the centre? It feels as if you're trying to escape something here, that maybe you're thinking in the back of your head, as soon as I'm leader, I'm going to shift the party towards the centre.
I don't know how you're getting to that, because I'm repeatedly saying the shift we've made in the last 5 years is the right shift. The 2017 manifesto is the foundational document, but that we need to build on that for 2024. I don't think you can make the leap from that to any that I'm going to move away from that foundational stone. But we do have to build on that so that we've got that credible programme for 2024 or whenever we get that opportunity.
Do you agree with one of your new Labour colleagues, Zara Sultana, who said there have been 40 years of Thatcherism in this country, including the last two Labour governments under Blair and Brown.
Well, look, I don't think trashing the last Labour government works. And if you look at Sure Start, which did incredible things for young people and young families, I don't think you can just trash that. Look at the schools, look at the hospitals that were built. Now, should that government have gone further? I think so. Did it make mistakes? I think so. But there are people who have had opportunities as a result of that government and support a result of that government that don't now have it. Child mentors, learning mentors in schools for young children who are having difficulty learning, not because they've got learning difficulties, but because of the situation at home. They were helped by the last Labour government. Some of them will have had very changed lives as a result of it. So that's why we don't trash the last Labour government. But I think always looking backwards is the wrong thing. I'm afraid our job is to look forwards as to what happens next, and we've got to do the heavy thinking on this.
Would you say that Blair and Brown were Thatcherites?
I just don't think that characterisation helps anyone. Should they have gone further in some respects? I think so. Did they make mistakes in some respects? Yes. But are there millions of people who benefited from that government? Yes, of course there are.
Now that you accept we are going to leave the EU on Friday,
yes,
how will you be marking that moment?
I will probably be, my diary is completely controlled by my team now. They will probably have me in a room or a bar practicing for the hustings the next day. So that's probably what I'll be doing.
It's not a moment for celebration for you. It's not a moment that you wish to mark in any significant way.
It won't be a moment of celebration. I won't be marking it. I accept what is going to happen. What I do think is that we should all focus on the fact that whilst we've argued about the Brexit deal for the last 3.5 years, uphill and down dale, we haven't addressed the underlying causes and reasons why people voted as they did. We've had no debates in Parliament about the issues across the country, the deep sense people have that they don't have enough control and influence over their lives, and the inequalities that led people to think actually it's better to leave. And we haven't addressed those at all, and we need to do that.
You're out of a job on Friday as well. No more Brexit secretary, so I guess no more shadow Brexit secretary?
I keep asking Steve Barclay what he's doing after Friday. I don't think he's quite sure, and I don't mean that with any disrespect to him, because he is keeping me informed. But yes, the shadows, the Brexit secretary is going, and therefore the shadow Brexit secretary will have to change into something else.
Do you have any idea what that something else might be?
No, I don't at the moment. It's an ongoing discussion. It rather depends where Steve Barclay goes and which department he goes into.
So you would intend to shadow him wherever he ends up.
But I think it's very important that as the department for exiting the EU is closed down, we don't say, well, that's the end of scrutiny, then we don't need to look at this. Crucially, what's going to happen next is the deal with the EU is going to be hammered out. Boris Johnson's made all sorts of promises that he can't keep, and we need to hold him to account, and we shouldn't stop that on Friday. We should increase that on Friday, and that's what I hope we will do. I mean, it'd be hard to do because he doesn't bother turning up to Parliament anymore. He's gone missing. His style of leadership is apparently not actually to lead, not to be there accounting for the actions he's taken. And this is a big problem because he's taking us out of the EU, but with no real idea where we're going or what's happening next. And so that scrutiny has got to be very, very heavy.
Just one last one on your shadow cabinet role. Would you serve in any other shadow cabinet among, if one of the other contenders won the contest?
Of course I would, if I was asked to do so. Okay. I believe in the Labour Party putting forward its strongest possible team, and I accept that we choose a leader through the members deciding. Once they've made a decision, it's the duty of all of us to get behind whoever that is.
Okay. All right, look, we're almost at the end now. A couple of quick fire questions. We've been a bit harder on you than we have on lots of our guests on this podcast because you are running to be Labour leader, just to explain why we're giving you a bit of a grilling on your politics. But thanks for your patience on that one. Right, a couple of quick fire questions just for fun. President Trump or President Putin?
Oh, neither. That's a choice nobody should have to make. Let's change them both.
Okay. I've sort of asked you this already, but Blair or Brown?
Neither. This idea that in order to make a decision, you have to have somebody else's name tattooed on your head. It's just not the way I've ever lived my life. It's not the way anybody else does in the outside world, in the public sector, in business, etc. People don't sort of cling on to other people the whole time. They just make decisions for themselves.
Right, you're doing a very good job of killing my either-or answers here.
Well,
my either-or questions. So why don't we ask you an open question? What would your Downing Street pet be?
My Downing Street pet?
Have you got any animals?
We've got a cat.
Okay.
Jojo, the cat. It'll have to be Jojo, because the kids would kill me if we get rid of Jojo. So it'll have to be Jojo. We'll have to take Jojo with us, although if I can ever get my wife and children to leave Kentish Town, will be a task.
And just lastly, what song would you walk onto stage to at party conference?
Well,
things can only get better.
No, well, I listen, and this will cost me votes in this race. I'm an Arsenal fan, and when we win, Sweet Caroline is played. And it hasn't been played quite so much this season for obvious reasons, but perhaps since that's a victory song, we could have that. But I may have to ask the team whether that's going to work.
All right, excellent. I'm laughing along as if I understand football in the slightest, but I'm sure that's a great answer. Keir Starmer, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. A couple of months' time, you might be Labour leader. A few years' time, you might be Prime Minister. It might not be such a fantasy scenario after all. So,
well, I hope it isn't, because I'm doing this not just because I think it's right for the party and the movement, but it's right for the country, and that's why all the candidates are doing it.
Okay, all right. Thanks very much for coming on the podcast.